We're always so excited to have any guest here on Off the Podium, particularly obviously our Olympian guests, the bread and butter of who we bring on this show. But selfishly, I always get a little bit extra excited when we can have people behind the microphone because that's what I wanted to grow up and be. I wanted to grow up and be that person behind the microphone. So we get to learn about another one of those people on the show today. And before I get into his achievements with the Olympics, just a couple of things for maybe some of our non-Australian viewers and listeners to get a bit of an update on who this guest is. The former host, I should say, of Basil's Footy Show, one of Cleo's 2004 50 most eligible bachelors of the year, the 1996 Best TV Personality from the WA Football Commission Media Awards, done a few other things, a couple of Australian Opens, Commonwealth Games, some other Channel 7 radio shows, all those sort of things, sort of the Lord Mayor of Perth, that's kind of important too. But we're here for the Olympics and has been involved in 9 Olympic Games, called some of Australia's most iconic moments, and if my calculations are correct, has called 17 gold, 13 silver, and 17 bronze for a total of 47 medals, and I hope I got at least in the ballpark of that being correct. He's calculating there. It's a pleasure to welcome to Off the Podium the one, the only Mr. Basil Zempilas. Basil, welcome to the show.
Ben, fabulous introduction. Thank you. I'm not sure of the accuracy, and obviously in sports broadcasting, accuracy is important, but was it 17, 12 and 17 or 17?
17, 13 and 17.
Well, pretty good. I tell you what, if you could average that strike rate, you'd be very happy with it. Just quickly then, so what sports, we're not counting individual medals here, but what sports do you think made up the gold medal tally? Swimming, we know.
So swimming. So looking at what you've called, obviously, short track from Salt Lake.
Yes.
Rowing,
yes,
canoe
good.
and kayak.
Yeah, good.
And I think that is it. A couple of silvers in the basketball.
Yeah. I think you got it.
And a freestyle skiing silver, of course, in Pyeongchang. So
yes. No, I think you have nailed it there. So, look, listening to it like that, and for a while there, I did count the medals, and I counted the medals not because, it sounds so stupid, doesn't it? We've got a tiny part to play in it all. The athlete does all the work, but after, and I know you'll get there, but after the Bradbury call in 2002, I'll never forget. There was a whole story of its own about that. But the very end of that story for me personally was after an amazing night, all of the time that it took to work out if the gold medal was going to stand, the medal presentation, and then, sort of slumping back in the chair, taking the headphones off and walking back to the broadcast compound. I remember going back in that night, Salt Lake City on a Monday or Tuesday night or whatever night it was. And when I walked into the 7 broadcast compound, everybody stood and clapped. Wow. And it was like I'd won the gold medal. But I'm getting to the point of this. At the front door, leading the sort of standing ovation, was Bruce McAvaney on the left, who only 2 years earlier had his incredible moment with Kathy. And on the right was Sandy Roberts, a long-time broadcaster and legend of the game with Channel 7. Bruce reached his hand out and said, "Congratulations, mate. Welcome to the club," i.e. the club of Channel 7 Olympic commentators who had called an Australian Olympic gold medalist. And I grew up idolising both Bruce and, of course, Dennis, who'd done the swimming before Bruce, before Ray Warren for a year, for games, and then me. And of course, Sandy, through all of his football broadcasts. And Sandy, unlike Bruce, who said, "Welcome to the club," Sandy reached out his hand and said, "You lucky bastard." I say that because for all of those games that Sandy had been to, since I think dating back to 1980 Moscow, maybe even 1976, I think 1980, Sandy had always done sports that the Australians, the beautiful and amazing sports, like, for example, the figure skating or the gymnastics, but no Australian gold medalists. And it really hit home to me how lucky I was to have called an Australian Olympic gold medalist, and how unlikely it was that, as it turns out, my first one, because I'd been to 2000 as a bit of a bits and pieces commentator, my first one was Australia's first one at the Winter Olympics, and what a way to start, and what a way to get myself into that club.
Yeah, you literally the first goal, as you said, for the Winters, first goal for Basil. That kind of it's a nice little thing, and I actually love the thing that earlier this year, when we're recording this, of course, during Beijing, the 20th anniversary of that moment, how Channel 7 put that great little package of obviously Stephen recounting it, but then sort of intersected that with you, because that's always something that I always love, getting that story of behind the people who call those moments. You mentioned Bruce, Kathy, we all know that call word for word. You, 13 words you uttered, the famous words, they've all gone down, Bradbury is going to come through and win gold. It's etched in our minds. So it was great to kind of hear your perspective of that in celebrating the 20th anniversary.
Yeah, no, it wasn't amazing. And of course, Stephen is the hero of that story. And I talk a lot about that. I am often asked to give keynote speeches, and both as a broadcaster, still a broadcaster, and clearly now as Lord Mayor. And almost all of them, a large component of it is that moment in time, not because of the unique circumstances of him winning gold, but there's a huge story around it. And the story for me, and I won't tell the whole story, but ultimately Stephen won that gold medal, not because he was the best skater that night. In fact, he knows, and he said himself, he was the 5th best skater. But he won that gold medal because he put himself in the race. He kept trying and trying to qualify for the Olympics, to be at the Olympics, to give himself another shot. And then the heat to the quarterfinal, to the semi-final, to the final. And he kept putting himself in the race. And so for me, the great untold story of the amazing finish is that gold medal, although incredible because everybody did fall over except Steve, the reason he was able to be there was because he never, ever stopped trying. He never, ever stopped giving himself a chance. And sometimes in life, as in business, as in sport, sometimes it's not about what will happen at the finish line. And if Steve had worried about, I won't be good enough, or I'm not as good as them, or they're going to be so good for me, he wouldn't have put himself in the race. But he put himself in the race. And in life, if we do that, what might happen? What could happen? And that, for me, is the great untold story of the Steven Bradbury story. So I love it, and I celebrate it, and how lucky I was to have a very small part in it all.
I love that sort of insight there. And I still say one of the best sporting autobiographies I ever read was Steven Bradbury's book telling his story. It was really incredible.
An amazing story. Yeah, it is. It really is. Yeah.
Those 13 words that I say are very famous there, Basil. But I mean, in recent times, another 10 words to add to the Basil Zempilas Hall of Fame. We can all go gobbledygook for Zach Stubblety Cook. Does that get brought up now a little bit more often on board with those 13 words from Salt Lake?
I quite like that one, actually. I like it because it's so off the charts. Look, what a luxury that you can be winning gold medals, and there are some that you've got the luxury of having some fun with because we're having such an incredible game. So and this makes it sometimes sound like we're making it about us. We never do. It's always about the athletes. But reflecting back to that Sandy Roberts conversation and all of the Olympics that he'd been to, I reckon it might be 13, 14 or 15. It could be up at that number. And Sandy wasn't fortunate enough because of the sports that he called to call an Australian Olympic gold medalist. At the Tokyo Olympics, we won 9 gold medals in the pool. 9 in the pool. Now, that's the most we'd ever won, obviously, at a single games. But, I mean, how fortunate, in the case of Steven Bradbury, we've waited 100 years to win 1 at the Winter Olympics. And here we are in the pool at Tokyo, and we win 9 in 8 days, 8 nights of competition. I mean, how lucky can I be? And so when you're getting into sort of gold medal number 5 or 6 or 7, then you think, well, what a luxury this is. We can actually have some fun. And gobbledygook was something that's a phrase that I've used with a few mates over the years. It's a bit of an Aussie phrase. I didn't use it during the race. That would have been disrespectful to Zach. But a few moments after touching the wall, and I think he was just getting out of the pool. And I had thought, gee, Stubblety Cook, it kind of sounds like gobbledygook. And maybe I'll...
We loved it. We loved it.
Roll that one out.
On that day that happened, Basil, we just went absolutely nuts for that. That was such a great call because it is obviously, as you're saying, you have the luxury of calling these events, and it is obviously about the athletes winning those medals, but in history, when we're watching this footage back, it is your voice that is being heard, of course. I mean, we've mentioned Bruce many of times. Obviously, as I said, we all know the Kathy call and everything along those lines. So Do you ever go into these Olympics and have that in the back of your mind, or is it just you focus on the job and then realize that at the end of it, oh, okay, well, my voice is going to be heard over this iconic moment for the next 100 years, essentially?
Yeah, well, so no, you don't. And I think if you ever get into that territory, then you are putting the wrong things at the front of your mind and the wrong priorities in play. But also, you do have to think about, well, this moment could last a lifetime, and it's a very significant moment, and you're trying to enhance the moment, if at all possible, with the words that you might choose. And so, I mean, going into the Tokyo Games, clearly the one that I thought was an event where if an Australian wins this event, this will be something quite phenomenal because of who that Australian was likely to beat, if indeed she was lucky. I'm talking, of course, about Ariarne Titmus and Katie Ledecky. So we've won the 400 before, Thorpe, of course, and Tracy Wickham, and it's been a very good event for us. And we've won other gold medals in the pool. But a little like beating Michael Phelps would be in the men's, beating Katie Ledecky was going to mean that if Ariarne Titmus was able to do that, that was going to be something very, very significant and very special. So the call for that one is one that I'm proud of. You need a lot to go right, and you've got to call it at the right time. And if you're going to try and come up with a line that sort of does the moment justice, you've got to get it at the right time. You've also then, you've got to make sure they win. Imagine going with a line and then they don't win. So there's a lot going on. And clearly you do think about, well, what's the sort of thing I might like to say in that moment if she wins? And so with that one, I was pleased that people feel as though perhaps the line did the moment justice, and that's a great thing. I mean, again, sounds like we're partly responsible for the moment. We're not. Arnie did all the work. The swim of a lifetime against the greatest female swimmer of all time, Katie Ledecky. She beat her. So I'm pleased that I was able to perhaps just enhance that moment a little by adding the right words at the right time.
Touched on the sports that you've covered across your 9 different Olympics. Is there one that if Channel 7 said, Basil, welcome to Paris, you can do whatever sport you want, or welcome to Milan, you can do whatever sport you want. Is there one that you're sort of itching to do?
No, swimming for me. Yeah, it's a real privilege to do the swimming, especially for an Australian broadcaster. We love the swimming. We don't follow it year in, year out for 4 years, but we certainly follow it at Olympic time and, for that matter, at Commonwealth Games time. And we've also been pretty good at following it through a lot of the World Championship cycles as well. And I always loved it. I reckon 1980 Moscow, Neil Brooks, who I ended up working with. And he was part of the Mean Machine, probably whet my appetite I would have been a 9-year-old then. And remember watching that and thinking, wow, it turns out he went to the same school that I was going to go to. I hadn't even got to that high school yet, but that was phenomenal. In 1984, they picked up a silver medal. I remember following him again, and I was hooked on the swimming by that stage. And then those big moments with Laurie Lawrence, Duncan Armstrong, Jonathan Sieben, Susie O'Neill, Kieran Perkins, Ian Thorpe, Grant Hackett, Liesl Jones, all of the relays, those great individual performances, of course, as well, Libby Trickett, Petria Thomas. These were before I got behind the microphone myself. But I love the swimming like Australians love the swimming. Not a great swimmer, but we understand it, don't we? You dive in, you got to go up and back, or you got to go down, you got to go up and back a few times. We know how it works. We've all had school carnivals. And so then to get the opportunity to call the swimming, and to get that opportunity after Dennis, somebody I've been lucky enough to call a mentor, a colleague and a friend. Den handed over to Bruce when Den was away at 9 doing the AFL. Bruce, obviously legendary broadcaster, and in Athens did track and field and swimming. The most phenomenal broadcasting performance. And I didn't realise it then, having done the swimming in Rio for the first time and realising how gruelling the schedule is, to imagine that Bruce then, and for a couple of days did both, to imagine that he did both, just phenomenal. And then Ray Warren, the great rugby league commentator, obviously, in the year that London, 2012. And then in 2016, I think 2015, I got asked, would you do the World Championships with a view to doing the Olympics for 7, the swimming? It's been probably the greatest thrill of my career in a way, because it's so special and Aussies love it so much. And it travels the borders. It's not an AFL states or a rugby league states thing. We all love it. And it's been a great joy. And to, because of that, get to work with people like Grant Hackett, Ian Thorpe, to get to work with Liesl Jones and Gian Rooney has been a great thrill. I've absolutely loved it. Long answer, but swimming would be the one.
You're on Off the Podium, Basil. This is the long answer show. I'll just say that. I just love that sort of that way you're going there from Dennis to Bruce to Ray to yourself. Do a couple more, Basil, and then hand it on to me to Brisbane. Just, I'm just saying, just can possibly do that way.
So 10 years away from Brisbane, and don't think I'm not thinking, can I make it that far? And can I make it that? I'm 51.
Easy. 61. Come on. Bruce is a spring chicken and he's still going strong. You've got plenty in you, Basil.
Yeah. It might mean that we've got to hang on to it. We still don't know about Paris as yet. So, but I hope that I've got another Olympics in me at least. It's a joy to do the swimming and an incredible sport. I admire the athletes. I love the stats and facts and all of those things as well. It's
always the stats. God, don't get me started on that. Before I let you go, Basil, one thing that I was going to suggest potentially for Paris, breakdancing. I mean, you can learn between now and Paris. I could hear you behind the vocals calling all the moves for breakdancing.
Breakdancing's in, isn't it?
It is. It's officially a sport for Paris. So
I have done some. I don't mean to be disrespectful when I say obscure sports. I had a bit of a go at the rock climbing somewhere along the line for Tokyo. And typically, what happens is, Seven will have a team of commentators, and there might be 8 of us or 10 of us. And we'll have our main sports. And then in the in-between times, and especially if an Australian is suddenly doing well or there's a gap in the schedule that might require some filling, we'll sometimes get asked to do a sport with not a lot of notice. I remember doing Greco-Roman wrestling, just the final at the Sydney Olympics in exactly these circumstances because one of the competitors was going for gold, not Australian, but going for gold at a 4th consecutive Olympic Games in the same event. And so our producers said, it'd be good to get a call on that. That's going to be Olympic history if he happens to win. And, hey, Basil, you've got a block there. Could you do it? And, you spend literally half an hour boning up on just enough. You're not going to call it like you've been doing it for 1,000 years, but just enough to call the result. I remember that. I can't remember his name, but it'll be easy enough to find. He won the silver medal in the heavyweight class, but he didn't win. He was beaten in the final. He'd won the previous 3 gold medals at the previous 3 Olympics, but won the silver in Sydney. And that sort of thing happens quite a bit in the modern pentathlon in 2016.
I was going to say that. Joe Griggs told that story about how you were all scrambling and what Scott McGrory ended up calling it, didn't he?
Scott McGrory, I got the call. Basil, where are you? A call came through and I was on the bus going back to our accommodation. I was out of play. So, the call's just going to all of our commentators and Scott was there. Scott, could you jump in and do it? And people have been lucky enough to get that opportunity. And, how skillful was that call to be able to basically go in, sit down, call it and get it right? Incredible. So it's a brilliant thing to have been able to be involved with. I mean, I'm an AFL man. I love it. Been lucky to do the tennis quite a lot as well. But there's something about those Olympic sports that is really special. And on the day that we record this for posterity is the day that Roger Federer announced his retirement. He's probably the person whose orbit through this job, the sports broadcasting job, I feel probably luckiest to have come into contact with. But equally, going to the Olympics as a broadcaster, calling those big swimming finals for Australia, I think when I think back over my whole career, I think, gee, how incredibly fortunate to have been able to do that. I feel very, very lucky.
Well, we're very lucky to have you on, Basil, and to learn about that, because there's obviously so much about this, your esteemed career in the Olympics that absolutely there's still. Before I let you go, can I get you to give me the Bradbury call again? Can you give me those 13 words as a nice closing moment right now?
Well, I thought I thought I'd remembered them perfectly. So the other one, by the way, the Ariane Titmus was, which is my favourite summer sport moment. To become a legend, you have to beat a legend.
Yeah.
But the Bradbury one, you couldn't really prepare for four people in front falling down and one guy from the back coming down. I'm eternally grateful that instead of saying has crossed the line first, which, believe it or not, are all the things that flash through your mind in a short space of time, I said, has come through to win gold. I'll do it in a moment. Even though we had no idea had he won the gold or not. And it was going to take about another 40 minutes before finally the flag went up, or the announcement over the PA, to say Steven Bradbury has been declared the winner. But I'm very pleased that I went with gold, because it stays now forever.
It does.
And every time I see it, I think a million things I could have said. And then I say to myself, how were you going to think of any of those other things?
Yep.
Or in that split second. So they've all gone down, and Steven Bradbury from the tail of the field has come through to win gold.
Oh, look at that. That is the gold way to end it. Basil, mate, thank you so much. That is a perfect way to wrap it up. And we definitely appreciate your time here on Off the Podium. And we'll see you in Paris, hopefully.
Great pleasure, Ben. And I will mention to the executive producers at 7 that when you've had enough of me, I've got someone ready to go.